Welcome to this special dialogue on India-France strategic relations brought to you by Center for Public Policy Research, CPPR, a think tank dedicated to in-depth evidence-based research on various public policy matters. I'm Anusri, Associate Research at CPPR. Today we have a very distinguished guest, Ambassador Rakesh Sood, joining us for an insightful conversation to analyze India-France relations in light of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to France as a guest of honor at the National Day of the French Republic on July 13th and 14th. Ambassador Sood has 40 years of experience in the field of foreign affairs, economic diplomacy, and international security issues, and he had led various Indian missions, strategic dialogues, and served as India's first ambassador, permanent representative to the Conference on Disarmament at the United Nations, and he was also the ambassador to France from 2011 to 2013. Welcome, sir, to the CPPR Dialogue. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here to discuss the key aspect of India-France strategic partnership.
Thank you, Anusri. I'm delighted to be with CPPR for this.
Thank you, sir. PM Modi's visit to France last week has a lot of significance because it marked the 25th year of India-France entering into a strategic partnership. And during this visit, both countries had agreed to further the cooperation in the defense and security space, nuclear, multilateralism, and maritime security. So Franco-Indo relations is something that stood the test of time, especially during India's nuclear test in 1998, and India won nuclear waiver at the US NST as well. India's first civil nuclear deal was with France. So over the years, we have seen the relations growing from the principle of strategic autonomy as the capability to make decisions independent from the great players in the region. So today, India and France share a close cooperation initiated or enhanced on a various range of issues, including in sensitive as well as sovereign domains, with a flourishing defense trade cooperation that has placed France as India's second largest arms supplier after Russia. So the relation also has an overall like-minded vision on the multipolarity and multilateralism, which offers a great potential to expand cooperation and advance on the original outlook that India and France offers to the world. So Ambassador, as we start this discussion, could you please set the tone for this conversation by providing your insights on the 25 years of India-France relations and whether this historic visit had brought a new momentum to the partnership?
I do think that if we go back to 1998, when India and France established their strategic partnership, it was the first time that India was establishing a strategic partnership with any other country. We had not had this we had never given this kind of a label to our relationship with other countries at any point in time. And I must say that this happened. President Jacques Chirac, he was the chief guest at the Indian Republic Day. So he had come in January. There is often a slight misperception among some people that perhaps we established this after the nuclear test. That's incorrect. What happened was that President Jacques Chirac had been, had sort of had a deep interest in India for many, many years. In fact, as Prime Minister, he had also been invited as chief guest on our Republic Day. So he's probably the only person who has been the chief guest at the Indian Republic Day, once as Prime Minister in the 1970s, and then again in 1998 as the President of France. Now, with the end of the Cold War, there was a natural ideological convergence, because what happened with the end of the Cold War and the breakup of the USSR, the Soviet Union, was that we found that the world wasn't moving towards more of multipolarity, but there was more of a unipolar, because US was the dominant country. And, US sort of controlled whatever the multilateral agenda was. And that is how things were. And this did not necessarily go down well in Paris. The French have always felt more comfortable with a multipolar system. And India was also talking about the need for greater multipolarity after the end of the bipolar world, the Cold War of the bipolar era, because of the rivalry between Soviet Union and the United States. Now, in the bipolar era, certainly France was an ally of the United States, and it continues. But now that Soviet Union was not seen as such a threat because it had broken up and all the rest of it, France was more keen to establish a more multipolar world. And this sentiment was something that was echoed in, in Delhi as well. And that is the primary reason why of this ideological convergence, which led to the establishment of a strategic partnership. What was important to recall is that in January itself, given the fact that India had had such a responsible record in terms of developing our nuclear capabilities, and there had been no proliferation from India, unlike in so many other countries. Many Western countries, Pakistan had taken plans or stolen or acquired special kinds of steel or equipment, and China, of course, had helped Pakistan with its nuclear program. So President Jacques Chirac said that the fact that India is outside the global nuclear order is an anomaly and should be addressed. So, and that is how the strategic partnership was developed. Now, this was during Prime Minister I.K. Gujral's tenure as Prime Minister. A few months later, there was an election, and Prime Minister Vajpayee he took over as the new Prime Minister of India. In May of 1998, on 11th and 13th of May, India conducted a series of nuclear tests. Prime Minister Vajpayee had addressed a letter to President Jacques Chirac explaining the rationale of the tests and saying that India would send a special emissary of the Prime Minister to come to Paris and meet with the President and also explain personally, carry Prime Minister Vajpayee's letter, and so on. Lo and behold, within less than 2 weeks, we had received a firm date, and Principal Secretary Mr. Brijesh Mishra and I traveled to Paris for that meeting, and we called on President Jacques Chirac, and that is how the strategic dialogue, which was envisaged in the strategic partnership, was activated. And initially, there were three pillars of this dialogue: the nuclear pillar, the space technology pillar. France has been a long-standing partner. I need hardly tell you, because you're sitting in Kochi, and you're not far from Bangalore or from Trivandrum, where a lot of our space establishment is located. So space was the second pillar, and the third pillar was defense. Once again, we had had a long-standing defense relationship. One of the first fighter aircraft that India got in the 1950s was something called the Uragan, which was in the Indian Air Force, it was called the Tufani. And then we got the Mysters, and then we got the Anglo-French Jaguars. And then in the 80s, we acquired the Mirage 2000s. And this is over and above other equipment as well. So there was a long-standing defense relationship as well with France. But as you very rightly said, in the last 25 years, we have seen many more new areas added. After 9/11, two new areas that were added were intelligence sharing and counterterrorism. Then, as we saw some terrorist attacks in France, particularly, France has a large, it has perhaps the largest percentage in terms of population of Muslims, because and we saw recently some of the troubles that have taken place. But France also suffered through a number of terrorist attacks on its territory. And then another issue that became very interesting for both sides to discuss was how to counter radicalization at home. What kind of strategies and policies should countries which are plural societies, what kind of policies should they adopt, and how do they track these attempts, particularly in an age dominated by social media, how to track these attempts at radicalization being made through mosques and things like that. Then thereafter, we added cyber capabilities. That was added to cyber security, was added to the strategic dialogue. And then gradually other economic dimensions also started taking greater role, particularly smart cities. France has a very, probably the best public examples of public-private partnership and public infrastructure in terms of housing, sanitation, water supply, waste management, public transport, the TGV, the fast trains, and so on. So public health services and so on. So there was, and we had embarked on a smart cities initiative many years ago. So that then became with a major plank for cooperation on the economic side. So what is happening is that the strategic partnership has both broadened as well as deepened. And I think both leaders, both Prime Minister Modi and President Macron, have reason to feel satisfied. But what is also interesting is that France is the first country with which we have signed a vision statement that looks at our relationship into the future to 2047, which means that both leaders feel that this is a long-term relationship, that it is a commitment, and they have reflected this kind of a commitment and confidence in the long-term relationship by signing such a document. I'm afraid this was a rather long answer, but but I just thought that I would give you the backdrop and at the same time indicate how the relationship has, as I said, both broadened and deepened.
I think so you rightly briefed us about like how the relations has been, growing in the last 25 years. So I think one of the major outcomes of we'll be coming back to the defense deals, as you had rightly mentioned. But another major outcome of the, initiative discussion that came out of the visit was the focus on the Indo-Pacific, where both India and France has a lot of strategic stakes. We have France maintaining a notable presence as a resident power in the Indo-Pacific region with overseas territories such as the La Réunion, New Caledonia, and French Polynesia. And France also has military bases in the area. So joint exercise between the two countries and the use of French military bases by Indian forces and achieving a real-time maritime domain awareness in the Indian Ocean, they all are like paramount importance for India. So a roadmap on India-France cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, as suggested by the both leaders, include cooperation in exchanges, port calls, and joint patrols as well. So they also agreed to set up an Indo-Pacific trilateral fund to help countries in the region with the startups and other projects in the Indo-Pacific aspect. So Ambassador Sood, could you please share your views on the scope of India-France partnership in the Indo-Pacific region? And what are the strategic convergences and security concerns for both countries in the region?
Well, first of all, the fact is that France is a resident power in the region because of its overseas island territories like Reunion Islands, And in the Pacific, you have the French Polynesia, and um, you have New Caledonia.
Yeah.
And so, you would be surprised to know that France has an exclusive economic zone of 2.7 million square kilometers
Yes.
in this region.
Yeah.
So it has more than 1 million French nationals living on its overseas territories. And naturally, um, it has a military presence, a naval military presence as well in these territories. And as what happened was that, particularly in the Indian Ocean side, in 2018, we had already signed a vision statement for the Indian Ocean. But at that, since that time, there has been a greater salience or a greater focus on looking at Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean as one. And so therefore, the term Indo-Pacific today has found much greater acceptability than was the case 5 years ago. So it was only natural that after having established a cooperative relationship with France in the Indian Ocean, and the fact that France also has overseas territories in the Pacific, it was only natural that we expand the ambit, the scope of what was announced as the vision of cooperation in the Indian Ocean to a roadmap for the Indo-Pacific. And that's what we have seen. So it has also been broadened. We have added, there is today, at that point in time, 5 years ago, a lot of focus was on piracy, combating piracy at high seas. And that was one of the big challenges. Uh, Today, there is a greater amount of concern about preserving marine biodiversity, ensuring sustainable development, ensuring that the island states with global warming, they are very vulnerable, ensuring that infrastructure in the island states be made more resilient so that they can survive the kind of extreme weathers, storms, tsunamis, things like that. So in fact, we are also talking of Indo-French medical center in the region. Now, so again, what I'm saying is that this is a kind of a broadening of the scope of the kind of cooperation which is possible to be done with France because it is a resident power. It also has a base in Abu Dhabi as well as in Djibouti, in addition to a naval presence on its island territories. So that automatically gives it a certain presence in the region. And I would say that while the Quad stands on its own, but we have a certain comfort level that we have developed over the years with France in terms of our cooperation in the Indian Ocean, which has now been expanded to cover Indo-Pacific.
Thank you so much, sir. So, as coming back to the defense and security aspects, as you have mentioned, one key aspect of the relations is the defense and India's defense contracts and with France. So, it's illustrating that like New Delhi and Paris have a common aim of maximizing their strategic autonomy in their national policies and global outlook. So, from India's perspective, there has been a willingness to diversify its procurement sources, and political reliability and trust has been one of the major decisive criteria in choosing France as a prime partner. So defense deal have been determined based on the basis of operational qualities of the equipment that we import, and also on the surety that France will not stop the supply of spare parts and weapons. So which some of our other suppliers have not guaranteed. So third factor that is like behind India-France defense trade is like India has wanted to transform its defense ties beyond this bilateral relationship to pursue opportunities for technological cooperation and co-development and co-production of defense equipment. So in this regard, India has cleared the purchase of the 26 Rafale marine jets for the Navy and the purchase of the 3 more submarines. And they also agreed to support the industrial cooperation to co-develop helicopter engines. And they're also working on the roadmap of the defense industrial cooperation. So Ambassador Sood, how do you look at these key deals and what is its impetus on the defense relations, especially in the manufacturing and co-production capabilities? And
Well, as I said, France has been a partner in the domain of defense since the 1950s. However, at that point, we used to more or less buy this equipment, like right up till the Mirage 2000s and so on. Subsequently, as the focus shifted to making more in India or developing technical capabilities in India, we wanted to focus more on acquiring technologies, and the French were willing. The first example in this was the agreement that was signed in 2005 for 6 Scorpion submarines. These submarines were built in Mazgaon docks in Bombay with the help and supervision of a French delegation that remained there to guide us. They shared the plans with us, obviously. Plans were the French plans, but we were able to develop local sources of supply for engineering equipment, for components and things like that. And whatever else that we could not produce locally, we were able to, the French helped us get it from external sources. Now, this, in fact, the project got delayed because this was the first time we were making these kind of submarines at home. And initially, there was a lot of concern that the project has been delayed. It got delayed by about 4 years. So the first submarine was supposed to come out in 2012 or 13, and it only got commissioned in 2017. So, but then thereafter, 4 more have already been commissioned, and the last of these is going to be commissioned early next year. It's already undergoing trials. So this shows how that capacity has been built up. So I think the fact that we are going to build 3 more at Mazgaon docks, and obviously these will have come off very quickly, because if from 2017 till now, in 7 years, we built 6 submarines. So the next 3 will be also coming out now, since that production line has been streamlined. So that's one of the great advantages. Then, as you know, when Prime Minister Modi had gone to Paris, he announced that we would buy 36 Rafales in a flyaway condition. Now, at that time, the agreement was then concluded in 2017 for the 36 Rafales. In that, there is a 50% offset, which is about 28,000 crores. Now, Dassault, the French company that manufactures the Rafale aircraft, is supposed to invest or develop. There is a list of related sectors relating to aerospace, in which this money will be invested to develop Indian capabilities, and that is what is happening. So I'm quite sure that with the Rafale Marine, the one that is the naval version of the Rafale Marine, which will be used by the Indian aircraft carrier, I'm sure that with that agreement also, there will be a fairly sizable offset obligation, which Dassault will take on, and this is what will help. But it is not just in the defense. I mean, earlier this year, if you remember, Air India and Indigo announced a total of 750 Airbus aircraft and placed orders for 750 Airbus aircraft. It's the largest order for Airbus in one go. And what is happening is that Airbus is therefore also looking at the fact that they should set up more of OEMs, original equipment manufacturers. So Airbus has a huge R&D center here, which is looking at developing Indian original equipment manufacturers who can supply components for the Airbus assembly line. There is also talk of putting in an MRO, a maintenance, repair, and overhaul center, because we will be hosting a very, very large fleet of Airbus aircraft in this country between all the airlines that are here. So I think that all this is because we have seen the French have not hesitated in transferring technology in terms of certain defense equipment. And even for the aircraft engine, well, for the helicopter, there are two separate projects here with Safran, which is the French engine producer. One is for the engines for our helicopter, what we call the advanced medium helicopter that HAL is designing. And for that, a joint venture will be established between HAL and Safran. And the second is the work for the advanced medium combat aircraft, which is which is currently being designed. I mean, the prototype hasn't emerged yet, but this is a fifth generation aircraft. It is supposed to come in after Tejas Tejas Mark 1 and Mark 2. After that has happened. And this is a fifth generation super stealthy aircraft. And this will be the mainstay for the Indian Air Force. And there is talk that France will be the one, and they've said that they are willing to work with us, develop an engine, and do 100% transfer of technology for something like this. So I think that across domains, whether in the naval domain or in the aerospace sector, we find a certain comfort level and higher confidence and trust in terms of dealing with the French. And I'm sure that this has stood both countries in good stead.
Thank you, sir. Just a added question to the defense union. So last month we have PM Modi visit to US as well, the state visit, and that time also we saw a lot of importance given to the production capabilities, co-production capabilities. So now with the France also we are looking at the co-production capabilities here of defense equipments. So how do you look at India's growing interest in these aspects, and how do you foresee our future?
Well, as I said, the defense relationship with France is an old relationship. What is happening now is that France is becoming a partner in helping to develop our own indigenous defense capability by sharing technology and advising us and giving us the kind of support that we need to develop this capability. So I think that this is something that will continue, but there are other areas as well which are relevant because at a people to people level, because many of these areas that we've talked of, defense, nuclear, space, counterintelligence, counterterrorism, these are all government areas, government to government essentially. But there are other areas, people to people and business to business, which have also been given a certain degree of importance. And one of the most important that I remember, which we used to work quite hard on when I was ambassador there, is Indian students. Now, traditionally, Indian students have found it easier to go to Anglophone countries. So they go to the United States, they go to Britain, and they go to Australia and Canada. I mean, for some reason, they would be hesitant at going to France. And also, one was the language issue. The second was that they would find it difficult to get a work visa, because let's say they complete their studies and after that they want to work for a year or 2 years to pay off a loan that they have taken to pursue their education. Now, this was something that was flagged to us when I was there, which was more than 10 years ago. And what is today happening is that many of the French higher education institutions are running bilingual courses, especially in terms of engineering or management, medicine, and so on. And they have very high quality educational institutions. So as a result, the number has already crossed. It used to be something like about 2,000 a year, Indian students going. Today, it has already crossed 10,000 a year. Not only that, for people pursuing undergraduate courses, there is, if you want to work for 2 years, there's an automatic 2-year visa, work visa that gets given. If you're pursuing a postgraduate course, this time during Prime Minister Modi's visit, they have said that a 5-year work visa will be given. So I think this is also changing things. What this means is that you get Indians who have worked and trained in French institutions. So as, let's say, French companies invest in India, or there are joint ventures that get set up here, or Indian companies go to France, this group of people automatically becomes a natural kind of employee base for these kind of businesses. And I think that is what will lead to the strengthening of the people-to-people connect. There are a lot of cultural ties between India and France. Traditionally, there have been, Indian artists from the time long back. Amrita Shergill was based in Paris, Raza in more recent years, so many of them. So Indian artists have always sort of gravitated to Paris because Paris has been the sort of fountainhead where a lot of art has evolved. It has some of the finest galleries, the finest museums. We have seen a lot of cultural exchanges in the field of cinema. France hosts the Cannes Film Festival, which is one of the leading international festivals where Indian filmmakers from the time of Satyajit Ray have been honored and recognized and their work applauded. So there is that connect, but I think we need to strengthen it much more in terms of more exchanges, particularly, as I said, among the young, among the youth, students and the like, because this will help in building up also greater empathy and understanding between the two countries.
Indeed, sir. I think along with our defense relations, our economic partnerships, like you have said, the cultural connectivity, everything is like in a positive trajectory, and we are hoping that the relations will take a enhanced step to further connect people, ideas, thoughts, and everything. So when we look at the challenges in this strategic partnership, from a global point of view. So France is strong enough to have something to offer on the diplomatic, military, space, nuclear sectors, and the sustainable development to India. But when we look at the international order, norms, and rules, or in terms of balancing China in the region, there's a lot of there's a lot of things that we still have to do. And also India holds significance for France, particularly in trade and defense cooperation. But maybe India might not be at this moment considered the foremost partner when addressing critical challenges in the, related to Russia in the region, in the Eurasian region, or like terrorism in Africa. So, and also when we look at the economic partnership, France's GDP is almost equal to that of India's, but bilateral trade remains far below the potential, as a trade with France constitutes only 1.41% of India's total international trade. So how do you look at these challenges in Franco-India relationship? and how the initiatives in the civil nuclear cooperation, space cooperation, and we have the rollout of UPI now in Paris, and the growing economic partnership in general will pave the future of the partnership. What are your views on setting the priorities for the next 25 years of India-France relations?
Well, first of all, you're right when you say that the trade relationship with France is much below French. There are reasons for this. The first reason is that insofar as France is concerned, the competence for trade issues lies with Brussels, lies with the European Commission. We can't go and sign an FTA with France as we can, let us say, now with UK, or as we can with ASEAN or something. Now, we have been in negotiations with the European Union on a free trade agreement, but these negotiations have been long, and so therefore there is this particular aspect. Individual European countries, the competence for trade does not rest with separate members. Of course, in the negotiations, they will take their stand on issues that are of interest to them. Like the French obviously would like us to reduce duties on French wines, for example, which is quite understandable. And the Germans would like us to reduce duties on automobile components, because that's, a strong sector for them. But ultimately, the agreement will be negotiated with all of these countries through Brussels. And that is what is key. The other thing is that, let's face it, I mean, France also has its own historical links with Francophone Africa, and they are major trading partners. So France exports a lot. France is not the world's largest economy like China or United States are, the two largest economies. So in that sense, our trade with them is never going to be of the magnitude of the kind of trade that we can have. But yes, if we look at our total trade with EU as a whole, then it is significant. Because that is how, because it is with EU that we look at it as, and I think so we need to keep that in mind. Secondly, yes, I think France is not, it is a major power. It has a voice. It is a permanent member of the Security Council. It is a nuclear weapon state. It has nuclear submarines and all of that capability. It has a very vibrant aerospace sector. So in that sense, it has those capabilities, but yes, it also has limitations. And then let's not forget, it is located in Europe. And Europe, there is a war going on in Europe today. So it has its own preoccupations, as it were. Now, we have, for example, taken a very different view from many of the European countries on the war in Ukraine. But I think, and we need to understand and accept that even though we are strategic partners, we cannot have absolute convergence on all our issues. And I think it is important to understand that the strength of the strategic partnership, the resilience of the strategic partnership, is not that you will have an ideal state of relationship and convergence on every single issue. No. The strength is that while you will have convergence on many issues, where there are differences, you will not express them in public, but discuss them in private. That, to my way of thinking, is what gives resilience and strength to the relationship. Now, before Prime Minister Modi's visit, there were a number of articles saying, perhaps President Macron will take up the Ukraine issue, etc. I'm sure it was discussed. There was no differences. There were no differences that were expressed publicly. And that is what is important. The press conference and the media reports and things like that. Nobody has talked of differences after the visit. It was speculated before the visit, but because it was never expressed publicly, and there are differences, that is evident. France is obviously much more involved because of the fact that it is sitting in Europe. But this is how I would judge the relationship. I mean, it can't be an ideal relationship.
That's very true, sir. So I think with that, maybe we can rightly conclude this session and shared historical vision and our relationship, even though it's a strategic partnership, was established in 1998. The historical relations goes beyond that, and to maintain strategic autonomy, like you said, when we discussing the divergent views as well, at the same time respecting that strategic autonomy in the global views, has helped both powers to develop a degree of trust and pragmatic partnership. So interestingly, both find the other partner valuable, but and the relationship is growing in that way, and not enough to move it towards our interdependence. So Modi's visit to Paris is therefore another important milestone to consolidate Franco-Indian special relationship with the emphasis on the objective of to maintaining a strategic flexibility in the global view. So I would like to express utmost heartfelt gratitude to Ambassador Rakesh Sood for sharing his profound insights on the Franco-India strategic partnership. And I think through our discussion, we have gained a deeper understanding of the convergences, interests, and the challenges that define this partnership of this time. Thank you so once again, and thank you all for listening. The CPPR team will be back soon with more interesting topics. Until then, goodbye.